Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jean Ellen Cowgill, President of Atlantic Media Strategies, which is the consulting arm of The Atlantic. And I'm so happy to welcome you all to the Aspen Ideas Festival and to this session. We're thrilled you're here. The Atlantic has been partners in producing the festival with the Aspen Institute for the past 12 years. And I'm pleased to have Southern Company here with us as an underwriter for the festival and to introduce their session today titled New American Security, a Greener, Cleaner Military. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Southern Company's Executive Vice President and President of External Affairs, Chris Womack. Chris, take it away.
Jean, thank you very much. And again, let me welcome each of you for joining us for this conversation. Southern Company is based out of Atlanta. We're an energy company all across the country, but principally based out of Atlanta. And we are pleased to provide service to some 19 military bases in our service territory. And over the past, I'd say 4 or 5 years, we've had lots of conversations with all branches of the service around renewable energy and to how they meet their goals around net zero. And so we've had wonderful collaborations. We've had wonderful success all across our territories and things that we're excited about as we move forward with a cleaner energy future. And so today I'm pleased to have a conversation with two of our wonderful partners who we have spent a lot of time with over the past few years, not only just having conversations about these matters, but also executing around really making things happen and getting to results. And so today, what we want to do is have conversations about why this is important to the military, all branches of the government, as they look at a more cleaner, a more renewable future, a more energy future that factors in things around security, both physical as well as cyber, and how we as their energy partner can support their goals going forward. And so we're pleased to have from the Navy as well as the Army, two great friends of ours. And so first let me introduce Assistant Secretary Katherine Hammack, who is in charge of installations for the Army and who has, like I said, we've worked with extensively over the past few years on conversations around energy policy. And so we're pleased to have her. She was nominated by President Obama and has been clearly confirmed and has been serving in this role as Assistant Secretary. We're also glad to have Bob Griffin, who's the Executive Director of Renewables for the Department of the Navy. And so working with Bob, working with Secretary Denny McGinn, they have been great partners with us as well in moving conversations around renewable projects, but also around electrification activities at some of their military bases. And so with that, I'll ask them a few questions and kind of get them to tell us more about their goals and objectives. And then before we conclude the program and the conversation, we'll ask you to share with us whatever questions you may have. But first, guys, like I said, we've been having this conversation, I know, probably about 4 or 5, maybe 6 years now, I think, as we've been engaged with these conversations around things that you talk about around net zero, be it energy, be it water, be it your total environmental footprint. But as we have focused on energy, why is this important to you? And what's been your philosophy and your policy that has been guiding you as we move toward the specific projects that we've been successful at executing? Secretary Hammack, I'll start with you first.
All right, first of all, Chris, thanks for the invitation to be here. But for the Army, it's really about resiliency. We need to make sure that our bases can have the energy they need to train and to deploy our forces around the world. And so resiliency is about a diversified strategy. There's grid power that we get from the utilities, but we've seen increasing instances of disruptions due to acts of nature or even due to acts of man. So resiliency by having distributed generation on our bases means that we're less vulnerable and less susceptible to risk. And the great thing is when we work with the private sector, like Southern Company, it's at no cost to the American taxpayer. Southern Company is coming and putting renewable energy on the Army bases, which increases our resiliency. It also gives them land, so it's actually a lower cost for them. It gives us the resiliency we're buying it at the same or a lower cost, so it's a win-win for all. So that's really the reason why the Army is pursuing renewable energy.
Bob, what about from the Navy perspective?
Well, I'd echo everything the Army said. We're also focused on regional resiliency, so not only inside the fence line, but outside the fence line in the commercial corridor, because we can't operate without the civilian influx every day to our base. So if we're lit up and everything outside's not working, it's not going to help us at all. So that's critical for us, and we've got several projects where we're actually going to export power, in the event of a storm or a superstorm Sandy, for example. So it's an interesting model. It's different.
But as we have these conversations, clearly, we've gone through Desert Storm, all the activities and events in Iraq, Afghanistan, other skirmishes across the country. When we talk about the military, we think that's what your primary mission is. So how do you have the conversations inside the Pentagon? How do you get the support? How does the policy evolve itself where this becomes a priority for the Department of Defense and all of the respective branches in the military?
Well, if you look at the federal government, the Department of Defense is the largest energy consumer in the federal government. And of that, the Army is the largest facility energy user. So we have both a responsibility to reduce our costs, to curtail our energy, and to make more, take advantage of renewable sources as a matter of expectations set by the citizens of the United States, set by Congress, set by the President. But at the same time, we're not going to do something that increases our operating costs. And the price of renewables has come down so much, whether you're talking about wind or solar or even biomass, to the point where it's the same or lower cost than traditional grid power. And I think that's the reason we see so many utilities investing in it.
Bob, what about from your perspective?
Well, we set really aggressive goals back in 2009. We made virtually no progress towards them up to 2014. Most of that, again, was the price point because we didn't want to pay more. We also didn't really rely on the strategic partnerships that we now have with Southern Company and other utility companies. So you figure we did about 8% of our gigawatt goal, in the first 5 or 6 years, and then we exceeded it and did a gigawatt by itself in 18 months. So the momentum is there. We thank the Army because we copied an Army model and basically got serious with it because my boss, Secretary Mabus, said, someone's going to leave if we don't fix this. Good motivator.
So what kind of goals have you set for yourself? I mean, as we have this wonderful, I think, philosophical policy discussion, and I think it's a great perspective to have. But what kind of goals have you set for yourself, and how do you feel about how you're executing around those goals?
I think each of the services set a goal of 1 gigawatt by 2025. And so through a lot of due diligence, we've each identified where those projects are or could be and are in some form of due diligence. Right now we have 300 megawatts in the ground producing electricity, and we're on track to have another 100 megawatts or more come online each year. So the goals were a bit of a stretch goal, and Bob said it quite clearly. There was a problem in trying to figure out how to do utility scale renewables on bases. And it took a lot of work, both with the Office of the Secretary of Defense, with OMB, with Congress, to ensure that we had the right authorities and contracting means in order to get this kind of acceleration of renewables.
Bob, there was an inference I heard about you modeling some of your work after the Army. I mean, we always think that the branches are very separate and that there's also sometimes internal competition and that you want to do things very differently.
We play football once a year. That's
Yeah,
true.
we're not going to talk about football.
But other than the football games, we work very collaboratively. And, Ms. Hammack made it very clear, a dedicated, focused office with nothing else in their sights but, meeting these goals of resiliency, which the gigawatt goal was basically just a contributor or a metric to resiliency in part. And we adopted that. We fought it for years, and then we said, you know what, she's right, and we did it. And I think we did it very well. We deployed 100 people across the country, 27 projects across the country, and in 18 months got them all done. And we did many with Southern Company, and we got over 207 megawatts with Southern Company alone, which we really do appreciate, because now we're going to ask you to go to the next level of microgrids to make that resiliency dream come true, and storage. And we've already got a couple projects we're working on with you now.
You know, it seems like I said, I can't believe we've been doing this since 2009. And I remember when we started, things like physical and cybersecurity was not kind of top of mind. But how does this play in terms of the considerations that we all are having now as we talk about things like physical, cybersecurity kinds of issues? And we heard a panel earlier today with Tom Fanny with Southern, Secretary Lisher with Randall, General Petraeus, talking about security issues. How does this conversation and your approach around renewables play into issues around security?
Well, there's physical and cybersecurity. So physical security, having power generation on the base behind the fence line, contributes to physical security. Cybersecurity is a matter of keeping up with the changes, you know, trying to stay ahead of or close to those who are threatening our capabilities. So I think it's a challenge. I don't think we have all the solutions, but we're working to try and master them. And that's where microgrids come in. Microgrids, you want to be able to direct the power to your most critical needs when and where you need it, and also balance renewable with grid power, with energy storage, with backup diesel generators. And a smart grid, a microgrid, does that. The challenge is it needs to be a microgrid that's cyber secure. And I think it's slowed down our deployment of microgrids as we look at what resilience means in a cybersecurity framework.
Right, and I think we all have to be visionaries, right? We have to believe in the storage solution coming to complement everything we're doing today. You know, we had a great conversation this morning about the future of storage and how quick it'll be here, but it's the game changer.
Yeah. And, you know, we'll have an election this fall, and who knows who the next president will be. I mean, one of the things I know from a business perspective is that as we go through the work that we're doing now, what about continuity in terms of will this survive through the next administration? Is this just a fad of the Obama administration, or does this have sustainable legs? I mean, what do you guys think? Is this the path we're on forever? I mean, is this the direction we'll continue on? Are you guys committed to continue in the direction that we're on right now?
I think we'll continue because we've broken the code, and the cost of renewables has come down. We figured out how to do it, how to partner with the private sector. It's a lower cost to the military, it's lower cost to the private sector. And I think we've all figured out by partnering together, we can get that kind of resiliency that we're looking for. And so that's something that the military, doesn't matter which political party you're looking for, resiliency is important. Now there's Congress that has put in place potential legislation to ban us from doing renewables, which is fascinating to see. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because we're not doing renewables at added cost to the taxpayer. We're not paying a price premium for it. We're doing it at or lower than grid power. So there's real no argument against it. And so we're doing the right thing for the right reasons, make it survivable beyond a political party.
Yeah, I mean, several different models, right? We've got regulated, deregulated, or say open market and regulated. In our open market transactions, we actually have modeled savings in excess of $500 million by buying long-term strips without escalation. Okay, so we're hedging, which helps us budget-wise. When we do our hosting transactions for using real estate, like we have with Southern, we've gotten over $100 million of infrastructure upgrades, second feeders, smart inverters, you name it. Whatever we needed at that base is in-kind consideration. So we're making money, and you know, like Secretary said, it's very difficult to say stop making money for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, as a partner of yours, I mean, what are you looking for in a good partner as you move down this path? And what do you need from us? What more do you need from us and from your other utility providers across the country and other energy providers across the country?
Well, I think some utility providers have found that maybe the government's a little difficult to deal with. We have federal acquisition regulations that we have to comply with, and they're not necessarily subject to negotiation. They are what they are, and that's something that Tucson Electric Power and the Southern Company have both recognized and have worked very cooperatively with us. I think sometimes the challenge is either public utility commissions or the lawyers who are trying to negotiate it like they would a private sector to private sector relationship, where in the federal sector we have certain templated requirements. And so a good partner recognizes the sort of like the ground rules on how you have to do business.
Bob, from your perspective.
Well, my background, I was the head of acquisition for the Naval Facilities Engineering Command for 15 years, so I was the contracting guy who could say no. I also know how to say yes, and I've used my skills from my previous job to maybe push them a little bit to be more innovative and accept market terms, because there is flexibility in the regulations, and we're making progress in that area.
So, Trick, I'm going to talk a little bit more about net zero. I mean, in terms of, I think we were visiting with you a few years back, and just all the elements of what net zero entails for the Army.
Well, we want to be able to ensure that our bases can sustain whatever environmental challenges they might experience. So in energy, it could be wildfires, it could be aging distribution lines or vulnerable distribution lines. In water, it is drought or increasing population. So really net zero is about the base producing as much energy on base as it uses over a year. Net zero water is about ensuring that the water you use goes back into the aquifer you drew it from, so you have a water equilibrium. And net zero waste is ensuring that we don't send waste to landfill, that we use waste as resources or we recycle appropriately. And at the very end, there's things that aren't recyclable and we do waste to energy. So really the net zero program is how to be more sustainable, but it's something we're taking from our permanent installations into deployment activities. So when a unit might go out to Iraq or Afghanistan, if they can move out with their own power for base operations and liquid fuels are only used for mobility, if they can generate water from air, and if they can manage their own waste stream, they're much more agile, much more expeditionary. So we're taking lessons we're learning in our permanent installations and translating them to theater operations.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I think we're still committed to the net zero concept in the warfighting environment. We've backed off in the non-warfighting environment. Basically, we've learned it's not potentially cost-effective in all cases to be net zero. And if our utility partner or some third party can give us the level of resiliency we need without us having the organic generation, that's okay too. So, occasionally we have to say maybe we were overly driven to be net zero and lost track of the purpose, which is to be resilient, on our installations here, not overseas.
I know in addition to renewables, we've had different conversations with each of you about other elements of your energy portfolio. Bob, we talked to you guys about electrification opportunities on some of your bases, from cranes to other equipment. Talk a little bit about some of those objectives and things that you guys are focused on around electrification.
Well, Edison Electric Institute and Southern Company brought to our attention that the Savannah port had basically electrified most of its equipment, including its gantry cranes, and that Delta Airlines had electrified most of its ground support equipment in Atlanta and is moving out across the board. We have planes, we have ships, just like they do. We have a lot of them, and we have the same ground support equipment that they do. And they showed us the economic and business model, which EPRI established for Delta in that case. And it's like a 5-year payback, and it provides cleaner energy. It's safer because it's not noisy. There's no greenhouse gas or pollution that comes from it. And it's actually cheaper to maintain, so it has a cheaper life cycle cost. and we're excited about it. We had the 3-star from Naval Air Systems Command with me and Secretary McGinn at Delta headquarters in Atlanta Tuesday this week, and they're excited and they're going to move out on it. So, you know, this partnership really has created another great dividend for us.
Does that work on every base or include bases? Not all bases are the same, and not all your ships are the same. So,
Well, where electricity is cheap, electrification makes more sense,
Yeah.
obviously. We all struggle with trying to do innovative things in the Pacific Northwest when you compete with hydro,
yeah.
right? I mean, you said that this morning, and I echo it completely. It's 3-cent power. I can't beat it.
Yeah.
So.
But I think you've also seen in terms of electrification, in terms of equipment, you can get the same kind of power and same kind of capabilities out of the electrified lifts and trucks and Ford pickups than you can with the diesels.
Requires half the maintenance,
Yeah.
half the mechanics. The downtime is less. I mean, we appreciate you opening our eyes to that.
Yeah. And then Secretary Hammack, I know we've had a conversation with you about electric vehicles and how we kind of begin to electrify that kind of passenger vehicle fleet that's so very, very important to you. Can you talk a little bit more about your thoughts about electric vehicles?
Certainly, and we're investing in electric vehicles, but if you think about vehicles, they have a lot of stored energy in them, and even the vehicles in the parking lot here, there's stored energy. And so we're looking at vehicle to grid, so that a vehicle might be used for mobility, but then when it parks, it can plug in and take electricity, but can also contribute back to the grid. And so we're doing that in theater operations where you might have a large MRAP or a Humvee come into camp. They plug in, they start to power the base. The base also renews the energy that they're using, recharging the batteries from solar energy with diesel as backup. So we're doing a lot of work on electric vehicles. We're also doing a lot of work on autonomous vehicles. We have autonomous leader-follower convoys right now that we're piloting. We have autonomous vehicles where we've got a Uber-like app, so a soldier can call up a autonomous vehicle to take them to their medical appointment and to bring them back, especially for some of our wounded warriors. And we're looking at autonomous vehicles. We've got a couple pilot large buses that will take soldiers from barracks to dining facility and dining facility to training range. So we're looking at both electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles simultaneously.
And even some more compressed natural gas.
Yes.
For more heavy equipment, bigger demands at some of your facilities, correct?
Absolutely. At Fort Benning, Georgia, we just invested in quite a few natural gas buses, and they used to be taking $2.75 a gallon diesel. They're now taking a 75-cent a gallon equivalent natural gas. And so it's really saving a lot of money for us, and you get the same utility. And back to some of these alternative technologies, there's less to maintain. They're easier to maintain because they're less polluting.
Bob, what are you guys doing around EVs and alternative fuels?
Well, we've got 500 electric vehicles that we're basically putting in service in California now in partnership with the California Energy Commission, taking some of their incentives and taking advantage of it. We did utility scale solar at Naval Weapons Station, Earl, New Jersey. And when we were there, one of the engineers said, you know, we store all the batteries for the submarines here because after 3 years, we take the batteries out of the subs, the backup power, because they're at 80% use and we won't have anything less than 90 from a safety standpoint. So we say, well, how many batteries do you have? And the guy pointed at warehouses, okay? And it's Crane, Indiana. He pointed at warehouses. And we said, so how many do you got there? And we started doing the engineering on it and realized it's about 47 megawatts worth of batteries that we have there that we can repurpose into backup and smoothing and uninterruptible power. So we're taking a liability in the form of used batteries, turning it into a major asset, which is amazing.
Interesting, never thought about that.
They're 400-pound batteries too. I mean, they're not the ones that come out of your car.
Yeah.
Big batteries.
Yeah.
So what are the barriers? I mean, what are the hurdles that we have to overcome to fully execute around the kind of goals and directions in terms of where we want to go with this conversation? I mean, what do you see in the way that we need to work on?
I think there's a misperception, whether it's by Congress or others, that we are doing this just to be green and just to comply with mandates. We're really doing it because it's smart business, it saves money, and it makes us more resilient. And resiliency is what it's all about. So I think helping people understand that renewable energy can give you resiliency, and that's really the mission for the Army.
Well, and believe it or not, the utility companies were not as cooperative generally 5 or 6 years ago as they are today to customer choice, change, and innovation, right? I mean, the coal plant has 15 years of amortization left on it. We're going to run it into the ground because that's our business model. I applaud Southern, I applaud the utility companies, Dominion, who have changed. And they saw basically distributed generation was a potential threat, and they're the best at doing what they do. Maybe they just need to change the business model a little bit. And you guys have been leaders in that area.
Very good. Any questions from the audience? Let me throw it to the audience for questions. Yes.
First, I want to say you're really well spoken. And
You want them to walk to?
oh, sorry. I should have waited for this. Even though we're in a very small room. You were really well spoken, and thank you for doing this. My question was, how many bases do we have in the United States, or is this happening overseas also? How many bases do we have, and what percentage have we been able to convert to green? How far along? Are these just ideas, or is this happening big time?
It's happening big time. The Army is the largest in terms of manpower. So we have the most bases of all the services. So we have 76 major bases that are like small cities. In every region, there's different capabilities. There's different resources available. It might be biomass. So up in Fort Drum, New York, we converted an old coal fire plant. Actually, the private sector converted an old coal fire plant on base to biomass. So it's taking clippings from the timber industry, what used to go to landfill, burning it on base, supplying all of the power to the base and to the local community at no cost to the government. And we're actually buying energy lower than the cost of energy in that area. So now the base is more resilient, the community's more resilient, and it's taking something that would have gone to landfill otherwise. Not every base has renewable opportunities. And so we're looking where there are opportunities. There has to be a regulatory framework and regulatory structure. Quite often it's a willing utility, or it has to be a partner in the private sector who's interested in providing that service. So I've got a base out in Utah that has a lot of capabilities, but it does not have the connectedness to the grid to be able to put that renewable energy back on the grid. So we are doing this, looking for capabilities across the board. Puerto Rico has wind, they have solar, and they're doing some biomass looking at it right now. In Italy, where one base is completely renewable energy and they have excess, which we are now going to distribute to another base in Italy. In Germany, we're putting a lot of solar out there. So this is a global concept. And then in Iraq and Afghanistan, where you have portable security lighting, which traditionally is a generator, consumes 10 gallons of fuel every night to give us the light output that we need from a security standpoint. We are now converting all of those to solar-powered light sets. And they're working great. They're quiet, which means we can hear better about what might be going on in the environment, and they don't require the same level of maintenance. So this is an overall strategy to leverage the advances we've seen in technology, where it's good for the Army, where it's cost competitive with our mission and gives us that resiliency.
Yeah, and by the end of the summer, the 207 megawatts worth of projects we have across 5 bases with Southern will all be functional and operational. In August, we have a project in California. It's about 680,000 solar panels in one location. It'll power 34% of the 14 bases we have in California at a price point lower than we're paying now. It'll meet and exceed the RPS requirements of California, both now and 5 years from now. We're doing a project in Italy with the State Department, trying to go complete renewable in Italy through new generation. We're targeting projects in Africa, Djibouti, the geothermal. So this is real. I mean, we're putting the projects in the ground.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
thanks.
Great question. Other questions?
Thanks for being here. This question might be more for Mr. Griffin. I know that renewable energy is great. I'm a big proponent of it. But from an energy density standpoint, I know natural gas is apparently pretty good. It's competing pretty well. But what sort of challenges have you seen regarding energy density? And I guess it's really for both. And I guess that's more for transport, right? Because for stationary, wind and solar, PV, all that's better for stationary. But is there more of a challenge for transport and payload kind of operations?
I mean, you're talking about just the fuel?
Yeah,
component?
that where maybe you still have to use fossil
Well,
fuels.
what Ms. Hammack said was so important is having a portfolio of energy is critical, right? Because everyone got sold on natural gas being the single point solution. Now look at California. Okay, California's got a natural gas problem that's going to cause rolling blackouts probably for the next year or two, at least this summer, okay, until they get that under control. And if you've put all your eggs in that single basket, you don't have a backup plan. So solar, wind, natural gas through grid power, I think having that portfolio is critical.
Absolutely. One of our bases has natural gas underneath the base. And so what we're doing is a local producer is extracting that natural gas. They are compressing it. We now have 6 natural gas cogeneration plants on base that is giving us both hot water and electricity. So that base is entirely powered out of the natural gas that's being extracted from underneath it. And it's at lower cost because we're not paying transmission and distribution pipeline charges because we're producing it all on site and using it on site. So resiliency has many different shapes and forms. And really we're talking about clean power. And clean power is a multidimensional subject. It is not just wind and solar, it's natural gas, it's even some of the biodiesels that are being examined that might come from plant-based sources.
Can I ask one more question about the Navy?
Sure.
It's more about resilience, and tell me if it's off the reservation here, but you know, I live in Miami, which is considered ground zero for the economic impacts of sea level rise, and so I've studied this and I work in the resiliency world. Navy Station Norfolk, I've heard, in that whole area, Annapolis is the most at-risk area in the eastern seaboard. And as far as resiliency and moving that base or assets, is that something that's on your radar?
My boss, Secretary McGinn, it's clearly on his radar, and he's basically working with Old Dominion University, several other universities, and the Naval Station to try to identify critical assets at risk. Well, we need to move them, we need to raise them. You know, how do we proactively get ahead of it? Because sea level change is coming and we're not going to be able to stop it. So it's a great point. I mean, we've got to be able to manage that, and managing that's going to take some investment.
Yeah, it does take investment, and so we have a base in Texas that is seeing rising water levels in the Gulf. And what happens is with surge, with tides and with winds, water's coming up through the sewer lines, and it's actually flooding some of the locations. So we're having to relocate and rebuild up about 150 feet higher and further away from the shoreline to ensure that the mission will survive. And so we're looking at multiple strategies in reaction to climate change. It's both climate change adaptation, adapting our infrastructure and looking at the long-term effects, but also climate change mitigation through some of the renewable energy or clean energy efforts.
Since my company's largest impact is around airline travel, I'm curious to know a little bit more about biofuels and how, are there military aircraft maybe that are experimenting with biofuels, or where do you see the future for that?
You can start.
I'll be happy to take the first shot at that one. My big boss, Secretary Ray Mabus, nicknamed the Great Green Fleet. And we made a significant investment in biofuels. And you know, initially in the R&D phase, it was 10x to what normal conventional fuel costs. We recently made a bulk purchase and launched the Great Green Fleet in the Pacific at par with conventional fuel. It was a 10% mix. And the real thought was we need to make sure our planes and our aircraft can take whatever fuel's available where they port, so we don't have a strategic disadvantage where they know we're going to have to go here because that's the only place we can get the fuel we need. So yeah, we're in it. We're not doing it irresponsibly. And I think we'll continue to look into that technology.
And we're looking at all of our vehicles for mobility to determine what kind of blends they can take, what is the chemistry behind it. So we have literally tested every kind of airframe in the Army, Navy, Air Force, all of the generators, all of our ground vehicles, a lot of the ships, to determine what kind of chemistry they can take, because when we deploy with one fuel, because you don't know whether you're going to need it for your rotary aircraft or for your tanks or for your generators. So it's essentially jet fuel that we take when we deploy, and everything runs off of that one fuel. So as the science advances in biofuels and diversity of fuels, we're looking at what kind of blends we can take, and then it will be determined about what theater we're in and what resources are available, and we'll be able to adapt to that.
It appears that you've got a very robust partnership with with Southern Company, and I just think it's always interesting to sort of look at what the key components of public-private partnerships are required to make that successful, to make those partnerships successful, because it does require a unique, you're each operating in a unique environment, and I just wondered if you could share some of your observations about that.
Well, I think Bob said it well in that we found that we had to have focused teams who both understood acquisition and the legalities and the resource needs to be able to meet with companies like the Southern Company to have high-level discussions, because our great operators on the bases are focused on running those bases. That's their primary mission. And they don't really have the skills or the resources to be able to have these kind of long-term conversations with the utilities and put into place some of these contracts. Because these contracts are novel, once we negotiate it, it then has to go to the Office of the Secretary of Defense and to the Office of Management and Budget for approval that we can execute these kind of contracts. So I've told my team that their job is to find the brick walls and the problems, and then to figure out how to work their way through it. And it's not easy, but when you have a willing partner and when you have a team that's ready to make it happen, they come together and figure out what the tools are that they need, and they can make hard stuff happen. So then the next time you go into a contract, it's much easier. And the next time's easier until it becomes routine. I wouldn't say it's routine yet, but I would say we're making a lot of progress.
Well, and understanding each other's business models are critical. I mean, really understanding in detail the cost of service model that the utility company uses to build its rates, and making sure you're not doing anything that has a negative impact on the rest of the rate base. Okay, appreciating if there's stranded assets that are going to hurt the company, which in turn is going to hurt the ratepayer, who's our neighbor across the fence line. We want to be good neighbors. So we've worked very, very closely. I remember in Georgia, we had to have Southern and Georgia Power come in and tutor us on our tariff and make us truly understand what our tariff is and what the impact would be on departing load. You know, it takes openness, it takes knowledge, it takes hard work. And both sides have been willing to do that in this partnership.
I mean, they've said it. Secretary Hammack said it, because those decisions have to flow up throughout the entire Pentagon. And I think, and that's bureaucracy. And bureaucracy is not very linear sometimes. It's very circuitous and it's very stop and starts. And so trying to get the bureaucracy to work, to be efficient, to have time commitments and to be committed has been something that we've been asking for, and we've seen success in terms of it getting done. Is it all standardized? No. And the same thing with us. I mean, because just in our territory, they go from Alabama to Georgia or to Florida to Mississippi. All the regulatory considerations are not the same. And so we're all trying to be flexible and adaptable under certain circumstances, but understanding what the ultimate goal in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. And we found, I think, some incredible successes. And I think we created a framework, but also a mindset to do more stuff going forward, which gets us to kind of where we are today. So, been give and take on both sides, and I think, I mean, it's been a wonderful partnership. So, but Bob, let me follow back on a comment you made about California. With the Aliso Canyon leak, I mean, that's potentially created some real issues for California for this summer. As you look at your energy mix, I mean, as we talk about renewables, as we talk about gas, I mean, how much attention will you end up paying to say, okay, I can't put all my eggs in one basket. I do need this diverse portfolio to ensure that I'm not stuck because of one event. So how much attention are you looking at your energy mix?
Well, I think in our case in California, we have a lot of ships and subs that we like to bring into the pier and basically turn them off. We're going to have to work with utility companies and put them back out and turn them back on and not draw that load at that critical time of day. So being a good partner with the California utilities will be critical. We have some on-base generation. We need to be frugal in what the critical app is for that, what we need to power and what we don't. Same thing that Ms. Hammack said, we're gonna have to work through it knowing the facts, but if they lose major gas supplies for periods of time in California, because they've gone so heavy, they're gonna have outages, right? I think it's unavoidable. So they're doing financial incentives right now trying to get everybody to cooperate.
But I guess pushing a step further, because in our business, we talk about a full portfolio, making sure we try to balance our kind of generating resources. Is that something that is of importance to the military? To say, we don't think it makes good, prudent sense to have all our eggs in one basket. Yes, renewables are important,
Right.
but we know we can't do all this with renewables. It's important to have this kind of diverse portfolio of generating resources to meet our needs, depending on what they are at a given time.
Absolutely, 100%. Which is, you gotta have options.
Yeah. And resiliency is a sort of a three-part solution. It's power generation from multiple sources. It's a microgrid, so you can send it where you need it, when you need it. And it's also storage. And so you've got to have all three in place for resiliency. So this is a journey. We're going to start with the renewable energy. We're going to work our way into cybersecure microgrids, and then work with energy storage as that technology advances. Yep. And so we'll get there. We're going to find out things as we go, but we're looking forward to the partnership with the private sector, because again, the military can't do it all on our own.
Yeah, I mean, we traded up almost 1,000 acres of land at Naval Air Station Lemoore to a private company who's bidding into the utility grid. And in exchange or consideration for that, we want an independent generator, 5 megawatts, and we want BASH management, which is bird management for our jets at Lemoore, because we have a lot of bird strikes. So we're doing whatever we can to be agile and find backup ways to have power. We're making a lot of land available, another portion of California, to host battery storage, 100 megawatts of battery storage. Instead of getting cash for that, we're going to have access to the batteries. So thinking out of the box as much as we can.
I mean, as a consumer, what's your energy use now, consumption-wise?
$1 billion a year.
And ours is 1.4 billion a year. But when we talk about those kind of resiliency things, for an instance, Oahu, anyone who's been to Hawaii or Honolulu, you probably don't know that all their power generation is on the shoreline in the tsunami zone for the entire island. And the international airport is on the shoreline in the tsunami zone. So if a tsunami hits Oahu, you could have that whole island go dark. And so we're partnering with the utility. Again, another great utility that came up, because the highest altitude location on the island is an Army base. So we're giving them land. They're going to put in a 52 megawatt biodiesel plant to help spur the utilities in Hawaii, and they're going to be able to power an Army base, Wheeler Army Airfield, and a local community hospital. So that's what resiliency is about. It's helping to restart the community and the military mission, which is in support of civil authorities. And when we're sending that kind of signal that we are looking for biodiesel, and the Navy's doing the same thing with their ships that are able to use biodiesel, then it helps spur an industry. And right now there's 3 startup companies looking at how they take the leftovers from pineapples and bananas and all of their agriculture and use that to generate a biodiesel, because the island's entirely dependent on imported diesel right now. So it's sending the right signals and working in the right partnerships to advance technology.
Is there
I think there's
is there any,
you got a couple out there.
Is there recruiting value in this as you go try to get new recruits? Is this something that you say we're lean, we're mean, we're cool, we're green?
To be honest, we have a very diverse program office, and Vanessa's in our program office, because we want to hear from all different levels. The millennials, what they think. My son's 28. Choosing an apartment, he wants to choose one that's basically managed efficiently from an energy standpoint. We have people in our office on our team that pay a higher electric rate because they're buying renewables through their rate in the PJM market. My age, it wouldn't happen. I just buy the cheapest one I could find.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think the profiles are different. People do care.
Question.
The Navy's the best at nuclear power with their ships. Have you expanded that to any of your bases, or?
We have not. We've been asked, can we basically run the reactor, run it backwards and power the base, and that technology doesn't exist from a safety standpoint, so we're not doing that. I think that the nuclear shipbuilding side of our house and our installation side are kind of stoved off from one another, because people ask all the time, and I'm not an expert in nuclear technology.
Yes.
I'm just curious, this is all fantastic information from the 2 distinguished speakers. 20 years down the line, what is your vision for this diverse portfolio? I don't want any facts, I don't want details, I don't want partnership and federal bureaucracy. With these fantastic experts that you have at your disposal, what is your vision and what is your vision, say 20 years down the line?
Our vision are net zero installations that both are able to operate by themselves and to work in concert with the local community. So just like that Hawaii model, to be able to help restart the local community or export to the local community. And that's why we're partnering with utilities, because that's their job. That's not our job. Our job is to train, equip, and fight this nation's wars. That's our core competency. And so we want to put the core competency right in the hands of those who do it well, but partner together so that we can ensure we have the right resiliency. So I think in the future, you will see our bases be net zero bases with both integrated building renewable energy or self-generation, more efficient systems, and then utility scale generations on the basis.
And I think the slight difference in philosophy is I don't think that we may result in certain locations in being net zero, but we want to be resilient and we want to have predictable, cost-effective power. So we're lining up these long-term transactions, with very low escalation rates to basically hedge against the future and what could happen. And we're going to have a diverse portfolio. We're not going to have 100% solar. We're not going to have 100% wind. We're not going to have 100% regulated or deregulated. It's going to be, hopefully, a well-crafted mix. We certainly are much smarter about our utility bills today than we were when we started the journey, because we realized we were putting projects in place to do on-base generation, and the utility company was just raising our bill for departing load. So we'd put $3 million for a cogen plant, and then they'd charge us $3 million more because we took the draw away. So now we at least go and ask the Southern company, if I put this plant on this base, what's going to happen? And they'll say, you've got about 1 megawatt worth of room and it won't have any impact on your rate. You go above a megawatt, it kicks you to a new tariff, and here's the price point. Right? That's progress. I mean, that sophistication didn't exist 2-3 years ago even.
But I guess in terms of, you believe that net zero is doable.
I don't.
You don't believe it's doable?
Yeah, I don't.
And see, that's the difference, because we're a land-based force. And we have a lot of land, so we have a different model where
Yeah.
the Navy's a port-based force, which doesn't necessarily have as much land. So the strategies are slightly different
Right.
because of the way we operate.
Right, if San Diego goes dark, we're going to steam over to Seattle.
Yep.
I mean, that's all that's going to happen. You know?
And we can't move.
Yeah, they can't walk to Seattle.
Okay, is there one more question before we wrap up?
I'll take it if no one else wants it. So I love metrics. I'm assuming that you keep a lot of metrics around, obviously, dollar savings and greenhouse gases, but are there any other interesting metrics that you might be keeping other than greenhouse gases and dollar savings, like around safety or lives saved or jobs created or continuity of operations? I'm guessing there might be some other interesting ones you could share.
Well, and some of the things we're talking about is jobs created. And certainly the renewable energy industry has created a lot of new jobs. It created new industries. And some of them are not necessarily big scale, but they're small scale and they're local. And we see a lot of veterans involved in that. Matter of fact, we have a Solar Ready Vets program that we're partnered with the Department of Energy, where they come in and they do training on the base, so someone who is retiring then can get trained in a skill set and then work with industry. But we also, our partners in the utilities hire a lot of veterans because it's interesting. They say, A, they show up. They're even early. B, they don't mind working outside. The soldiers are outside an awful lot. So, they don't mind working outside. And when they have a job or a mission, they take it through to completion. And those are basic skills. They say, we can teach them how to be a lineman, and we can teach them a lot of other things. But the basic skills that they're learning in the military are really lifelong skills that translate to industry.
And one thing I'd add is no surprise, but military bases have great impact on communities. And in many communities where they're housed, where they're located, they are a principal employer, and the soldiers buy cars. They're a major resource in those communities. And so as we talk about electric vehicles, whether it's at Benning or all across this country, as we put in place the infrastructure for the military facility, that will then be the seed, be the base to expand it throughout the entire community. So there's great, I think, community benefit as we make these kind of investments with the military that we also take into consideration. Jobs, economic impact, quality of life, all of those kind of things that we pay attention to as we engage in these kind of partnerships.
I'll just agree with you too. I think that covered it pretty well.
So, guys, to wrap it up, your last words on this topic.
Well, again, to what I opened with, this is not about a luxury. It's not even about greenhouse gas emission reductions or being green. It's about resiliency. And those others are benefits that come out of it. Cost savings, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, being green, but the focus is really being more resilient.
Yeah, I think that we've opened a door for many others. I mean, you look at an Army base or a Navy base, we're not any different than a university campus, but for the weaponry. I mean, the weapons are the difference. So I think what we're doing right now, you're going to see major universities, major corporations, the Lockheed Martins, the Raytheons, they're all going down this same journey, this same road. And if we led them there by being their biggest customers, and then I think we've done something really well.
Well, guys, thanks very much. You guys have been and are great partners as we prepare for a more cleaner, affordable, reliable, and safer energy future going forward. And we thank you very much for your partnership, and thank you for being with us today.
Oh, our pleasure.
Thank
And
you,
guys,
Chris.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Well done.